All right, today we got a V8 Lexus. They make excellent cars, there's no arguing that. Just realize that their V8 engines like this are expensive. It's got the big old V8 engine. V8 engines put out a lot of power. I don't know why they hide them with these stupid beauty covers. It drives me nuts. I mean, it's kind of a sign of our times. Beauty covers, everything's hidden. There's no reason to hide things. And if you really think about it, okay, what's this? This is all covered up. What do you want under the hood? Heat dissipation. This holds the heat in. So if you live in a hot climate, it's going to degrade the wiring harness. It's going to degrade everything under there because the heat can't escape. Now, if you live in Alaska, probably a good idea. It'll hold the heat in, but there aren't that many people in Alaska. It's a dumb idea, but hey, that's the way they make things these days. You just can't deny that each era set its own car design trends. In fact, many car enthusiasts who are nostalgic for classic cars say that the cars from the 50s, 60s, or 70s had diversity and distinctive beauty. But modern cars today lack personality, originality, and diversity. They're homogeneous, mainstream, and boring in comparison. And when you stop to think about it, well, it's somewhat true. I mean, yes, new cars can be sleek, bold, and shiny. But nevertheless, across the board, cars are more similar and homogeneous than ever before. So what's killing the design of American cars? The reality is that there are a lot of other impacting factors that heavily dictate how new cars look. Take, for example, government regulations. Ever notice how modern cars have higher front ends compared to older cars? This is because the U.S. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety set certain pedestrian impact standards. The result is a higher hood and a higher back. After all, the rest of the car needs to follow. And that's why modern cars have a higher belt line than before. Many car makers don't want to raise the roof line because that would make the car look awkward and odd. So the roof line usually stays the same. But this is the reason why many modern cars have shorter rear windows, or what some people call bunker windows. Let's talk about U.S. federal rollover crash standards. This led to car makers adding thicker pillars to cars. Thicker pillars allow car makers to add additional airbags, which is a positive side benefit since it protects us. The collateral damage is that it kills cars' aesthetics. In fact, this is the reason why passengers in the back row have ever smaller side windows. And the valance window or vent glass, that's the triangle side windows in the back, are so small these days, they're hardly functional. There are other regulations that impact even the creases in sheet metal and sheet metal edges. For example, European Union laws state that a minimum of 0.2 inch radius for all edges on the front and rear fascias. A sharper 0.1 inch radius is allowed for other exposed body panels. Basically, anything that can hit a potential pedestrian body or head has to be soft. Even grills and badges can't be sharp, but must have blunted edges. So designers have to get smart and skillfully give the illusion of any sharp edges. Also, their manufacturing facilities need to get precise if they don't want to be accused of not being in compliance. This is similar reasoning why many modern American cars have fatter, flatter bumpers.
Do you think Cadillac CTSs are reliable, especially the older generation? No. They're not reliable at all. If you go for a V8 engine, if it's not the North Star engine, they can be okay. If it's North Star engine, really. But if it's a V6 engine, they're all junk as they age. You'd never want to buy a used V6 Cadillac engine. They zoop them up with turbos and stuff to get enough power, but they don't hold up. They can't take it. If you do find one that's a V8 and has a standard transmission, I've got customers with them. They're fun to drive. They're still going to have a lot of problems with motor mounts breaking, and you're going to have to spend $1,000 or so changing the motor mounts out, but they can be fun to drive. I still wouldn't buy one though myself.
Did you know that the U.S. dictates that headlights must have at least 7.8 square inches of illuminated surface area for each brake light? Just for safety reasons, of course. Of that, 1.9 square inches must be visible 45 degrees off the car's center and 15 degrees below the taillight's horizontal center line. That's why the McLaren P1's Fury taillights are super thin and arch the way they do. They comply with the law, but at bare minimum to optimize style. Just imagine being the inspector who has to check each new car down to each inch, degree, and letter of the law. If you hate faded headlights, here's something to prevent them from fading in the first place. It's called plexus, and it was originally invented for the plexiglass on fighter jets. Now this is faded because the ultraviolet rays of the sun has faded the plastic. You can polish them, but it's already been damaged. You'll have to keep polishing and polishing and polishing, or you can buy new ones. Now I bought new ones for this Matrix years ago, but I didn't want them to fade, so I used this. You only need to do it 3 or 4 times a year. It protects it from ultraviolet rays. Also, let's take a look at the Ford Raptor. You can't deny it's a beastly machine, especially with those front semi-truck running lights on its grille. But it's not just for aesthetics or design brilliance that Ford applied them. Actually, it's because the U.S. mandates that any vehicle that's more than 80 inches wide has to have 5 amber auxiliary lights. It's a requirement that these lights be installed on the grille or on the roof. Ever wonder why the Jaguar F-Type has those black plastic fins on the rear body? Everyone knows that sports cars inherently love to reveal a bit of tire tread. It's naturally part of the design language, and it's the reason why stylists give sports cars' bodies rear wheel cutouts. But EU laws mandate that fenders must cover the entire tread width to a specific degree. So Jaguar got clever. They added the fins just enough to satisfy the EU law while showing off some tread.
A Jaguar XF or Audi A6. It's a toss-up there, you know. I would say if you're a driver, you probably like the Audi because it does handle quite well. They're driving machines. There's no arguing that. If you like looks, get the Jaguar. If you like driving and you value your money, get a Lexus.
In the 1950s, there were less car models available to customers compared to what we see now. But not just that, any consumer could differentiate each car like a Mustang versus a Cadillac very easily. I do have to say, I learned how to drive on a Chevy Biscayne. It was a rolling couch. They had the bench seats. It was like driving on your living room couch down the road. But it ran and ran and ran. Big old V8 engine. They had to recall it for the motor mounts. Now, modern cars, generally, the engine sits on top of the motor mount, and then the motor mount's bolted to the frame, so it's sitting on it. In the case of this GM V8, it was actually hanging on mounts. So if the mounts broke, the motor could slam and hit the ground. Well, they built them wrong, and they had a recall. So my grandfather drove it to the Chevy dealer, and he brought it back. He brings it back, and he's laughing his head off. So I say, "Hey, Gramps, what are you laughing about?" He says, "Well, you know, they're worried that the motor mount's going to break, the engine hit the ground." Here was their fix. They put a chain on each motor mount, one on each side, so that if the motor mount broke, instead of the motor slamming on the ground, you cause a wreck, have all kinds of problems, it would hang on the chain. You still couldn't drive the car that way, but they didn't have to go through the trouble of replacing the motor mounts. It would have cost them a fortune. They just put a stupid chain around them, which didn't take long to do. That's because there were less government regulations. On the flip side, it also meant that each model differed from another in terms of safety. For example, the 1953 Mercury Monterey had a rigid steering column and sharp levers on the heating system. The problem is it could potentially impact the driver on impact. So while we can appreciate there are safety standards put in place, we can also understand how laws impact even the mechanical design and layout of cars. Over the decades, the U.S. has added laws that require a car maker to add seat belts, airbags, crumples, and for every safety feature that gets mandated, it puts a restraint or fence around what car stylists can conceive. There are lots of other constraints too, but consider this added layer of complexity. The rules in the U.S. aren't always the same as the rules in Europe or Asia, so you can imagine how car stylists and engineers need to create multiple versions for different markets. Or worse, if they want to cut costs and create a design that simultaneously complies with multiple markets, well then, they're forced to work with the least common denominator. So you can see how that stifles creativity. If a car isn't designed from the beginning with all markets in mind, then even changing a plastic piece can become a quickly expensive job. The current model of the Cadillac One was ordered by President Barack Obama, but wasn't completed until after its 2018 deadline. President Trump had the honor of being the first president to use this new presidential model. And today, President Biden is using it. Believe it or not, this updated vehicle is estimated to weigh over 22,000 pounds. This new version is built by General Motors and takes many design cues from the Cadillac Escalade. For one, the headlights look like they were taken from the Cadillac Escalade SUV, and the new grille is reminiscent of the latest Cadillac design trend introduced by the Escala concept car. The new beast, like its predecessor, is a heavy armored limousine that's built on the platform of the heavy-duty GMC Top Kit and is lined with steel plates to protect against IEDs. I don't know what's under the hood, but it should definitely be a sturdy drivetrain capable of moving 22,000 pounds of aluminum, ceramic, and steel armor. Its outer walls are 8 inches thick. Its laminated windows are 5 inches thick. Fusion layers of reinforced glass and polycarbonate. By the way, only one window on the driver's side can be lowered, and only by 3 inches. Each door is believed to weigh as much as those on a Boeing 757. When the doors are closed, it forms a 100% seal that can prevent chemical attacks. And just in case, there's an oxygen supply for the president to use. The vehicle also carries a supply of blood with the matching type for the president and his wife in case the need arises for emergency medical treatment. As a protective measures against intruders, it has Kevlar reinforced run-flat tires, which eliminates the possibility of punctures and can keep the Cadillac One on the road for a considerable distance. But if for any reason the tires do not hold up, it can even ride on its steel rims. Among other things, it's also equipped with night vision devices, smoke screens, and even a cannon located in front of the hood to spray tear gas in case it's attacked by a crowd. At the back, a special device on board that's capable of spraying oil to gain distance if they're being pursued. GM won the $15.8 million contract for the current presidential limo, which includes the construction of 12 or more armored limousines. Each limo costs about $1.7 million today. The beast has little to do with the standard production version of the Cadillac Escalade, seeing as its chassis, diesel engine, and drivetrain are based on GM's heavy commercial vehicles. But fans of the Escalade will always say otherwise. Car designers aren't just limited by government regulations. Like it or not, they're also limited by physics. Take, for example, aerodynamics. Aerodynamics has a huge impact on car performance, fuel efficiency, and wind noise. But aerodynamic requirements can also kill a car design. A case in point is the Chevy Volt. When the concept version first came out, it had more visual flair. But the reality is that this vehicle had been made as a concept vehicle. The real vehicle would have offered less air resistance than any other sedan in all of Chevy's history. So that's why Chevy Volt we see today is significantly different than the original concept. For the sake of car performance and fuel efficiency, Chevy changed the Volt from rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive. This meant that car proportions needed to change too. Most of the design adjustments happened on the back end of the EV. The concept had a round back with a short overhang, which isn't aerodynamic. So Chevy added sharper edges to control air separation points and minimize drag, and that's what we see today. Take a look at the Chrysler 300. This is Chrysler's iconic full-size luxury sedan. It's for the sole purpose of optimizing fuel efficiency that the rear was made aerodynamically higher than the front. This wedge shape creates less drag, so the car uses less fuel. It's scientifically smart for sure, but you can't say the same for aesthetics. Sometimes you have to sacrifice design in the name of aerodynamics. In fact, it's not uncommon in the car industry for designers and aerodynamics to be at odds with one another. Consider too, as the science gets more precise, this means the requirements are more difficult than before, and the limit to creativity can become hair-splitting tighter. It used to be they had a window to work in, inches in fact, but now it's millimeters. Problem is, if you prioritize physics and aerodynamics, then you end up with cars that start looking all the same. Many performance cars fans love and expect certain cars to be loud. To them, the roar of a V8 is music to their ears, but the US has regulations that cap the sound levels or amount of noise coming from a car. Each state has different requirements, but even stricter are European requirements. But they all share a common goal, which is to minimize the public's noise-related stress, potential for high blood pressure, and other health ailments due to loud cars. This led sports car makers to modify or redesign specific exhaust systems. Doing that isn't cheap by any means, but it's not just that. Nowadays, mechanical technology means cars are more efficient than ever. So it's cheaper for car makers to install artificial car noises that mimic engine noise. If you haven't seen my video on mufflers, check it out. A largely unspoken impact is also gender. Just look back in the 1960s when America produced stunning muscle cars and other distinct classics. But not long after that time, more women started gradually entering the workforce. Then in the late 1970s, more women started attending college and get more professional jobs. And this meant more women needed to drive. Also, more women were now able to buy cars. Today, we have more working women in U.S. history than ever before. Would it surprise you to hear that according to one statistic, women today buy or influence the purchase of 85% of all cars? Also, more women hold driver's license than men. Compare that to the 1960s when men held 60% of driver's license in the U.S. Women also spend less time on the road. So this is the reality of the gender demographic. And car makers have been following the changing trend. For example, statistically speaking, women tend to choose smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Needless to say, car makers take that into consideration when they style cars that appeal to the crowd. So we must say, no doubt, this too has some impact on car design and style. We no longer see muscle cars due to the oil crisis of the 1970s and the subsequent entrance of more efficient foreign cars. Nevertheless, even fuel-efficient cars today don't carry that boxy tank look, that angular, bold, and stereotypically manly form we saw in the 1950s and 60s. Nowadays, cars have more wider, gender-neutral appeal. They're more homogeneous and mainstream. Well, in conclusion, diverse, stunning cars with personality are very appealing. I agree. But I think we can all appreciate that cars today are safer than in decades past. Personally, if I had to prioritize between safety, fuel efficiency, performance cars versus aesthetics, well then, I'll choose a homogeneous car rather than an unsafe, unique car. After all, what use is a beautiful car if you get injured or worse, lose your life? But now, you tell me, have you noticed that modern cars are more homogeneous today than before? Do you think older? Do you think other factors are also contributing to this trend? Please comment below and share your opinion. If you like this episode, like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.